Behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where centuries of royal tradition echo through marble halls, a single decision would shake the very foundation of the British monarchy. It was a choice that would pit love against duty, past against future, and tradition against transformation. When King Charles III stood at the crossroads of his reign, the woman he chose to stand beside him would not just determine his personal happiness. It would redefine what it means to be royal in the modern world. The silence that swept through the palace corridors that autumn evening was not the peaceful quiet of a kingdom at rest. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a monarchy holding its breath, waiting for a king to choose between the woman who had waited decades for recognition and the woman who had captured the nation's heart. This is the untold story of how one choice changed everything, forever altering the course of royal history and revealing the true cost of wearing the crown. What happened behind closed doors when Charles made his decision would remain one of the most closely guarded secrets of the modern monarchy. Until now, the autumn rain pelted against the tall windows of Windsor Castle as King Charles III stood alone in his private study, the weight of the crown feeling heavier than ever before. 3 months into his reign, the newly crowned monarch faced a decision that would define not just his kingship, but the very future of the British royal family. The ornate desk before him held 2 folders, each containing detailed reports that would influence the most important choice of his life. The first folder bore the official seal of the Palace Press Office. Inside were polling numbers, public opinion surveys, and media analysis reports that painted a clear picture. The British public had spoken, and their voice was unanimous in its clarity. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had become the most beloved member of the royal family. Her approval ratings soared at an unprecedented 87%, higher than any royal in modern history. The public saw her as the perfect embodiment of a modern princess, elegant yet approachable, dutiful yet relatable, traditional yet progressive. Charles lifted the second folder with trembling fingers. This one contained something far more personal and infinitely more complex. Medical reports, private correspondence, and personal testimonies that told the story of his wife Camilla's declining health. The woman who had stood by him for decades, who had endured public scrutiny and media persecution to become his queen, was facing a battle that no amount of royal privilege could win. The early stages of dementia were beginning to claim the sharp wit and fierce intelligence that had first captivated him all those years ago. Dr. Helena Morrison, the royal physician, had been brutally honest in her assessment. Camilla had perhaps 2 years of public appearances left before her condition would become impossible to hide. The monarchy could not afford another scandal, another crisis of confidence. The British people needed stability, strength, and continuity. They needed a queen who could carry the royal duties forward with grace and competence for decades to come. The king walked to the window, watching the rain create intricate patterns on the glass. Each droplet seemed to carry the weight of his dilemma. How could he choose between loyalty to the woman who had loved him unconditionally and duty to the crown that demanded sacrifice at every turn? The irony was not lost on him that he was facing the same impossible choice that had defined his mother's entire reign: personal happiness versus royal obligation. His thoughts drifted back to that fateful evening 6 weeks earlier when the palace staff had first presented him with what they delicately termed the succession scenario. Sir Edward Whitmore, his private secretary, had laid out the situation with the cold precision of a military briefing. The monarchy's approval ratings were at their highest point in a generation, largely due to Catherine's popularity. The public saw her as the future of the royal family, the bridge between tradition and modernity that the institution desperately needed. But there was more to the story than public opinion polls could reveal. Behind the scenes, Catherine had been quietly assuming more and more of the Queen's traditional duties. When Camilla canceled a state dinner due to exhaustion, Catherine stepped in seamlessly. When the Queen Consort missed a charity gala because of confusion about dates and times, Catherine covered without drawing attention to the absence. The palace staff had begun to rely on her not just as a backup, but as the primary representative of royal femininity. Charles remembered the conversation he'd had with his son William just days after the coronation. William had been direct, as always, but respectful in his approach. "Father," he had said, "Catherine is ready. The people love her, and she understands her role better than anyone. If you're thinking about the future of the monarchy, you need to consider what's best for the institution, not just what feels right personally." The words had stung because Charles knew they were true. Catherine had transformed from a shy university student into one of the most effective royals in the family's history. She had mastered the delicate art of being both accessible and dignified, modern and respectful of tradition. When she spoke, people listened. When she appeared at events, attendance doubled. When she championed causes, donations poured in. She had become exactly what the monarchy needed for the 21st century. But choosing Catherine meant more than just recognizing her capabilities. It meant making a decision that would break with centuries of royal protocol. No king in British history had ever set aside his wife to elevate his daughter-in-law to the position of queen. The legal and constitutional implications were staggering. The Archbishop of Canterbury would need to be consulted. Parliament would need to approve new legislation. The other Commonwealth realms would need to agree to the unprecedented change. Charles picked up his private phone and dialed a number he had memorized but rarely used. Professor Margaret Thornfield answered on the third ring. As the leading constitutional expert at Oxford University, she had advised the royal family on legal matters for over 2 decades. "Your Majesty," her voice was warm but cautious. "How may I assist you?" "Professor, I need to understand something that may sound unusual," Charles began carefully. "Hypothetically speaking, what would be required for a monarch to change his queen during his reign?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Professor Thornfield was not easily surprised, but this question clearly caught her off guard. "Your Majesty, are you asking about divorce, abdication, or something else entirely?" "I'm asking about a situation where the current queen might step aside for reasons of health, and another member of the royal family might assume those duties officially." "I see." The professor's voice became more clinical, more academic. "Your Majesty, such a situation has no precedent in British constitutional law. It would require new legislation, likely new constitutional amendments in several Commonwealth nations, and would raise questions about the nature of royal marriage itself. The Queen Consort's role is not simply a job that can be transferred. It's a personal union between the sovereign and his wife." Charles felt his heart sink. "But it's not impossible. Nothing is impossible with sufficient political will and public support, Your Majesty. But it would be the most significant constitutional change in the monarchy's modern history. It would make the abdication crisis of 1936 look like a minor administrative adjustment." After ending the call, Charles slumped into his leather chair. The comparison to his great-uncle Edward VIII was particularly troubling. Edward had given up the crown for love. Charles was being asked to give up love for the crown. The parallel was painfully ironic. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a photograph that few people had ever seen. It was taken at Balmoral 3 summers earlier, showing Camilla laughing at something William had said while Catherine played with the grandchildren on the grass nearby. Both women looked genuinely happy, genuinely comfortable in each other's presence. The friendship between his wife and daughter-in-law had been one of the unexpected joys of recent years. That friendship made his current dilemma even more agonizing. Camilla genuinely admired Catherine and had often spoken privately about how proud she was to see her grow into her royal role. Catherine, for her part, had always treated Camilla with respect and affection, never showing any resentment about the complicated path that had led to her becoming queen. The king's contemplation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. "Come in," he called, quickly returning the photograph to its drawer. Lady Susan Pembroke, his longest-serving aide, entered with a tea service and the evening briefing papers. At 72, she had served the royal family for over 4 decades and had seen every crisis, every triumph, every moment of human drama that played out behind palace walls. "Your Majesty," she said as she poured his tea. "Forgive me for speaking out of turn, but you look as though the weight of the world is on your shoulders this evening." Charles managed a weak smile. "Perhaps because it is Susan." She set down the teapot and looked at him with a directness that only comes from decades of loyal service. "Your Majesty, if I may be so bold, whatever decision you're contemplating, remember that the British people have survived much worse than constitutional changes. They survived the Blitz, the abdication, 2 world wars, and the death of Diana. They'll survive whatever comes next, as long as you lead with integrity. And what if integrity requires me to hurt someone I love?" Lady Susan paused in her arranging of the tea service. "Your Majesty, with respect, you've been hurting someone you love for your entire adult life. The question is whether you'll continue to hurt the same person or whether the time has come to make a different choice." Her words hung in the air like incense, heavy and meaningful. Charles realized she wasn't just talking about Camilla or Catherine. She was talking about the British people who had watched him struggle with personal happiness and royal duty for decades. As Lady Susan left the room, Charles turned back to the window. The rain had stopped, and the late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the castle grounds. In the distance, he could see the round tower built by William the Conqueror nearly 1,000 years ago. How many kings had stood in similar rooms, facing impossible choices? How many had sacrificed personal happiness for the continuation of the crown? But Charles also knew that his situation was unique in royal history. Never before had a monarch been blessed with such a capable alternative. Catherine wasn't just his son's wife. She had become the embodiment of what the modern monarchy could be. She represented hope, continuity, and the possibility that the royal family could remain relevant in an increasingly democratic and egalitarian world. The phone rang again, interrupting his thoughts. This time, it was William, calling from Kensington Palace. "Father, I hope I'm not disturbing you." William's voice carried a note of concern. "Catherine and I have been talking, and we want you to know that whatever you decide, you have our complete support." "William, this isn't easy for any of us." "I know, Father, but I also know that Camilla would want what's best for the monarchy. She's told Catherine as much, several times. She understands the reality of the situation better than anyone." Charles felt a lump forming in his throat. "Your wife has been remarkable through all of this." "She has. And, Father, she's ready. She's more than ready. The people see something in her that even we sometimes forget to appreciate. She could be the queen this country needs for the next 50 years. After the call ended, Charles made a decision that surprised even himself. He walked to Camilla's private quarters, where he knew she would be having dinner and watching her evening television programs. The doctors had recommended maintaining normal routines as much as possible. He found her in her sitting room, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, watching a nature documentary. She looked up as he entered, and her face brightened with the same smile that had captivated him decades earlier. "Charles, darling, you look dreadful. Come sit with me." He settled into the chair beside her and took her hand. It felt smaller than he remembered, more fragile. "Camilla, we need to talk about something important." She muted the television and turned to face him fully. In her eyes, he saw a flash of the old sharpness, the intelligence that had made her his perfect partner in so many ways. "This is about Catherine, isn't it?" she said simply. Charles was stunned. "How did you know?" "My dear man, I may be losing my memory, but I'm not blind. I see how the people look at her, how they respond to her. I see how effortlessly she handles situations that took me years to master. And I see how you look at the future. Camilla, I would never." She placed a finger gently on his lips. "Charles, listen to me very carefully. I have loved you for most of my adult life. I have fought for that love, endured criticism for it, and waited decades for the recognition that came with our marriage. But love isn't about holding on when letting go would be better. It's about wanting what's best for the person you love." Tears began to form in the king's eyes. "I can't ask you to step aside. I won't." "You're not asking, darling. I'm telling you." Camilla's voice was steady, resolved. The monarchy is bigger than both of us. It's bigger than our personal happiness or our private struggles. Catherine can be the queen this institution needs. She can carry it forward in ways that I never could, even at my best. They sat in silence for several minutes, holding hands and watching the silent images of wildlife on the television screen. Finally, Camilla spoke again. There's something else, Charles. Something the doctors haven't told you, because I asked them not to. Charles felt his blood run cold. What do you mean? The progression is faster than they initially thought. I have perhaps a year of good days left, maybe less. Do you really want to spend that time fighting constitutional battles and media speculation about my fitness for the role? Or would you rather spend it enjoying our last good months together, knowing that the monarchy is in capable hands? The weight of her words settled over him like a heavy blanket. She was right, of course. She was always right about the things that mattered most. When did you become so wise? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I've had good teachers, she replied, squeezing his hand. And I've had time to think about what really matters. What matters is that when you and I are gone, people will remember this reign as the time when the monarchy found its way forward. Catherine can make that happen. As Charles returned to his study that evening, the two folders on his desk no longer seemed to represent an impossible choice. They represented a path forward, difficult and unprecedented, but ultimately right. The silence that would sweep the palace when he announced his decision would not be the silence of shock or scandal. It would be the silence of recognition that sometimes the most profound act of love is knowing when to let go. The morning mist hung low over the grounds of Sandringham House as Catherine, Princess of Wales, walked the ancient pathways that had been traveled by generations of royals before her. She had come to the Norfolk estate seeking solitude and clarity, but instead found herself haunted by the weight of conversations that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. It had been 3 days since her private meeting with King Charles, 3 days since he had presented her with a proposition that defied every convention of royal protocol. The memory of that conversation played over and over in her mind like a film reel she couldn't turn off. The king had been gentle but direct, his words carefully chosen yet emotionally charged. Catherine, he had said, I need you to consider something that may sound impossible. I need you to consider becoming queen. Not queen in the distant future when Charles's reign ended. Not queen through some tragic circumstance, but queen now, during his lifetime, as his chosen successor to Camilla. The constitutional complexity of the situation was staggering, but what troubled Catherine most was the human cost of such a decision. She had known Camilla for over 15 years now, had watched her transform from a figure of controversy into a respected member of the royal family. They had developed what Catherine considered a genuine friendship, built on shared experiences and mutual respect for the unique pressures of royal life. The thought of displacing her, even with Camilla's apparent blessing, felt like a betrayal of everything Catherine valued about loyalty and family bonds. Catherine's phone buzzed with a text message from her private secretary. The Prime Minister's office had requested a meeting, citing matters of constitutional importance. The speed with which word was spreading through official channels was both impressive and terrifying. Whatever decision she made would reshape not just her own life, but the entire structure of the modern monarchy. She thought about William's reaction when she had finally told him about the king's proposal. Her husband had been supportive, but realistic about the challenges ahead. Kate, he had said, using the name reserved for their most private moments, this isn't just about you becoming queen earlier than expected. This is about fundamentally changing what the monarchy means. If you accept, you become the first queen in British history to assume the role through merit rather than marriage or birth. You become a symbol of everything the institution could become. The weight of that symbolism was not lost on Catherine. She had spent years carefully crafting her public image, balancing accessibility with dignity, modernizing royal traditions while respecting their historical significance. But stepping into the role of queen while Camilla was still alive would thrust her into uncharted territory where every gesture would be scrutinized and every decision would set precedent. Her walk brought her to the small chapel on the Sandringham grounds, where she often came when facing difficult decisions. As she sat in the quiet sanctuary, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a middle-class girl from Berkshire to potentially the most powerful woman in the British establishment, the path had been neither straight nor easy. She remembered the early days of her relationship with William, when every appearance was dissected by the media, when commentators questioned whether a commoner could ever truly understand the demands of royal life. She had proven them wrong through dedication, intelligence, and an innate understanding of what the public needed from their royal family. But this was different. This wasn't about proving herself worthy of royal status. This was about accepting a responsibility that would define British history for generations to come. She would become the first queen to gain the title through demonstrated capability rather than marital or hereditary right. The precedent would echo through centuries. Her contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of her personal protection officer, who informed her that an urgent call was waiting from Buckingham Palace. Catherine made her way back to the main house, her mind racing through possibilities of what new development could require immediate attention. The call was from Sir Edward Whitmore, the King's private secretary, his voice carrying an unusual tension. "Your Royal Highness, I'm afraid we have a situation developing. There appears to have been a leak to the media. The Sunday Times is running a story tomorrow about potential changes to the Queen Consort's role. We need to discuss damage control immediately." Catherine felt her stomach drop. She had hoped for more time to consider her options, more time to prepare both personally and politically for whatever decision she made. The media attention would now make every moment of deliberation a public spectacle. "How much do they know, Sir Edward?" "Enough to be dangerous, Your Royal Highness. They're reporting on Queen Camilla's health situation and speculating about your increased role in royal duties. They haven't connected all the pieces yet, but it's only a matter of time." Catherine closed her eyes, feeling the familiar pressure that came with major media attention. But this was unlike anything she had experienced before. This wasn't speculation about fashion choices or parenting decisions. This was about the fundamental structure of the British monarchy. "Sir Edward, I need to speak with Queen Camilla directly. Can you arrange that?" "Of course, Your Royal Highness. Shall I schedule a formal meeting?" "No, something private. Just the two of us." 2 hours later, Catherine found herself in Camilla's private sitting room at Clarence House, the same room where the Queen Consort had received her during those early years when Catherine was still learning to navigate royal protocol. The irony of the location was not lost on either woman. Camilla looked tired but alert, her eyes holding the sharp intelligence that had made her such an effective royal partner to Charles. She gestured for Catherine to sit across from her, and, for a moment, neither woman spoke. "I suppose you've heard about the newspaper story," Catherine began carefully. "Charles told me this morning," Camilla replied. "He's beside himself with worry about how this will affect you." Catherine leaned forward slightly. "How this affects me? Camilla, how are you feeling about all of this?" A small smile played at the corners of Camilla's mouth. "My dear Catherine, you're worried about hurting my feelings when you should be thinking about whether you're ready to change the world. This isn't about changing the world. This is about family, about loyalty, about doing what's right." Camilla set down her teacup and looked directly into Catherine's eyes. "Listen to me very carefully. When I married Charles, I knew I was joining something bigger than myself. I knew that personal feelings would sometimes have to take second place to institutional needs. I've made peace with that reality. But this is different, Camilla. This isn't just about personal sacrifice. This is about asking you to step aside while you're still perfectly capable of fulfilling your role." "Am I, though?" Camilla's voice was quiet but firm. "Catherine, I'm 76 years old. Even without the health challenges, how many more years could I realistically serve as queen? 10? 15 at most? You could serve for 40 or 50 years. You could guide this institution through changes we can't even imagine yet." Catherine felt tears beginning to form. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for that level of responsibility." "Of course you don't. No one ever does. Do you think your mother-in-law felt ready when she became queen at 25? Do you think I felt ready when Charles finally made me his wife? Readiness isn't something you feel, Catherine. It's something you grow into. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Charles entered, looking haggard and concerned. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Edward called. The media situation is escalating. We need to make some decisions quickly." Camilla looked between her husband and Catherine. "What kind of decisions?" "The constitutional experts are saying that if we're going to do this, we need to move fast. The longer we wait, the more damaging the speculation becomes. They're recommending that we announce the transition within the week." Catherine felt the world spinning around her. "Within the week? That's impossible. I need time to prepare, to understand the full implications." "Catherine," Charles interrupted gently, "there's something else." The Prime Minister called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. The political ramifications of this situation are becoming significant. If we're going to change course, we need to do it while we still have control of the narrative. That evening, Catherine returned to Kensington Palace to find William waiting in their private study, surrounded by constitutional law books and parliamentary procedures. The sight of him researching on her behalf filled her with both gratitude and apprehension. "What did you find?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "It's complicated, but not impossible," William replied. "The transition would require new legislation, but given the current government's majority, that's manageable. The bigger challenge is the constitutional precedent. We'd be fundamentally altering the nature of queenship." "In what way?" "You wouldn't be queen consort, Kate. You'd be something entirely new, a queen regnant while the king still reigns. It would make you more like a co-monarch than a traditional queen. The legal experts are calling it a constitutional monarchy within a constitutional monarchy." Catherine absorbed this information slowly. "And what would that mean practically?" "It would mean that you'd have independent authority, not just ceremonial duties. You'd be able to make decisions about royal patronages, state functions, even some governmental advice without needing the king's approval. You'd be building a parallel court that could eventually become the primary seat of royal power." The implications were staggering. Catherine would not just be replacing Camilla. She would be creating an entirely new model of female royal authority that had no precedent in British history. "William, this is bigger than anything we imagined." "I know, and that's exactly why it could work. The public is ready for change, for modernization. The monarchy needs to evolve or risk becoming irrelevant. You could lead that evolution." That night, Catherine couldn't sleep. She walked the halls of Kensington Palace, thinking about all the women who had shaped the monarchy before her. Queen Victoria, who had redefined royal power in the 19th century. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, who had helped the royal family survive World War II. Queen Elizabeth II, who had modernized the institution while maintaining its dignity and relevance. Now she was being asked to join that lineage, not through marriage or inheritance, but through demonstrated capability and public trust. The weight of that responsibility was overwhelming, but so was the opportunity it represented. She thought about her children, about the kind of monarchy they would inherit. If she accepted this role, she would be shaping not just her own future, but theirs as well. She would be showing them that leadership was earned through service, not simply inherited through bloodline. As dawn broke over London, Catherine made her decision. She would accept the role, not because she felt ready, but because the monarchy needed leaders who understood that readiness was less important than commitment to service. She called Charles first, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was agreeing to. "Your Majesty, I've made my decision. I accept your proposal with one condition." "What condition, Catherine?" "That we do this in a way that honors Camilla's service and preserves her dignity. This transition should celebrate what she's achieved, not diminish it." "Of course, Catherine." Camilla would expect nothing less. The next phase of the transition would test every skill Catherine had developed over her 15 years as a royal. She would need to navigate constitutional complexities, media scrutiny, public opinion, and family dynamics while preparing to assume responsibilities that no woman in British history had ever held. But as she looked out over London from her palace windows, Catherine felt something she hadn't experienced since this all began: excitement. She was about to become part of history, not just as a participant, but as an architect of the monarchy's future. The quiet revolution was about to begin, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, would be the one to lead it forward into uncharted territory that would define the British crown for generations to come. The oak-paneled walls of the Cabinet Room at number 10, Downing Street, had witnessed many constitutional crises throughout British history, but none quite like the one unfolding on this gray October morning. Prime Minister Sarah Richardson sat at the head of the polished table, surrounded by her most senior ministers, constitutional lawyers, and advisors from both the Cabinet Office and the Palace. The emergency session had been called after the Sunday Times story had exploded across the British media landscape like a constitutional bomb. Headlines screamed variations of Queen Camilla two-step aside and Catherine's crown moment, while social media buzzed with unprecedented speculation about the future of the monarchy. Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister began, her voice carrying the weight of someone who understood that the decisions made in this room would echo through British history. We are facing a situation without precedent in our constitutional framework. King Charles has formally requested that Parliament consider legislation to facilitate what can only be described as the first voluntary transition of queenship in British history. Lord Chancellor Michael Hartwell, the government's senior legal advisor, shuffled through a thick folder of documents. Prime Minister, the legal complexities are staggering. We're not simply talking about a change in ceremonial roles. This would require fundamental alterations to our understanding of royal marriage, succession law, and the nature of sovereignty itself. Attorney General Patricia Davies leaned forward, her expression grave. The Marriage Act would need significant amendments. Currently, there's no legal framework for a king to have what amounts to two wives with royal status simultaneously. We need to create an entirely new category of royal position. What exactly is the palace proposing? Asked Deputy Prime Minister James Morrison. Sir Edward Whitmore, representing the palace, opened his own briefing folder. The proposal is for what we're calling a regency of service. Queen Camilla would retain her title and certain ceremonial roles, but would transfer the majority of her public duties and constitutional responsibilities to the Princess of Wales, who would assume a new title, Queen Regent. The room fell silent as the ministers absorbed the implications. Foreign Secretary Amanda Cross was the first to speak. The international ramifications of this are enormous. We'd be explaining to 15 other Commonwealth realms that their shared sovereign has essentially appointed a new queen. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they'd all need to agree to this change. Some might use this as an opportunity to finally become republics. There's more, Sir Edward continued. His Majesty is aware that this transition would require not just legislative approval, but a new coronation ceremony. Queen Regent Catherine would need to be formally invested with her new authorities in a service that would parallel, but not duplicate, the traditional coronation. Chancellor of the Exchequer David Palmer raised his hand. What about the financial implications? Are we talking about maintaining two separate royal households? Two sets of staff, security details, official residences? The palace has considered this, Sir Edward replied. Queen Camilla would retain Clarence House and a reduced staff. Queen Regent Catherine would assume the full state apartments at Buckingham Palace and the primary ceremonial responsibilities. The overall cost of the Crown Estate would actually decrease over time. Prime Minister Richardson studied the faces around the table. Each minister was clearly grappling with the unprecedented nature of the situation. Let me ask the fundamental question, she said. Do we believe this arrangement serves the best interests of the British people and the stability of our constitutional system? Constitutional expert Professor Margaret Thornfield, who had been invited specifically for this meeting, cleared her throat. Prime Minister, if I may offer an academic perspective, what we're discussing is essentially the formal recognition of a transition that has already begun occurring informally. The Princess of Wales has been assuming increasing royal responsibilities. Her public approval ratings far exceed those of any other royal family member. From a practical standpoint, This formalization might actually provide more stability than continuing with the current arrangement. Home Secretary Rachel Thompson raised a concern that had been weighing on everyone's minds. What about public opinion? How do we explain to the British people that their king is setting aside his wife of nearly 20 years? That's where the palace's communication strategy becomes crucial, Sir Edward responded. This transition would be presented as Queen Camilla's own choice, made in consultation with medical professionals and in the best interests of the monarchy. The emphasis would be on her wisdom and selflessness, not on any failure or inadequacy. And the Princess of Wales has agreed to this? Asked the Foreign Secretary. Yes. After extensive consultation with the Duke of Cambridge, Her Royal Highness has accepted the role, contingent on parliamentary approval and constitutional safeguards. Lord Chancellor Hartwell had been taking extensive notes throughout the discussion. Prime Minister, if we proceed with this, we'll need to establish several key legal frameworks. First, the exact scope of the Queen Regent's authority. Second, the process for this type of transition in the future. We can't create a precedent without establishing guidelines for how it might be used again. What kind of timeline are we looking at for the necessary legislation? The Prime Minister asked. If we fast-track it through Parliament, we could have the framework in place within 6 weeks, Davies replied. But that would require support from the opposition parties. This can't be seen as a partisan political decision. Chief Whip Martin Clark had been quietly calculating votes throughout the meeting. Prime Minister, I believe we can secure cross-party support. The opposition has generally been supportive of the Princess of Wales. The bigger challenge might be the House of Lords, where constitutional traditionalists could raise significant objections. What about the Church of England? Asked the Prime Minister. The Archbishop of Canterbury will need to officiate any new coronation ceremony. Sir Edward nodded. His Grace has been consulted privately. While he has concerns about the theological implications of essentially blessing 2 royal marriages simultaneously, he understands the exceptional nature of the circumstances. He's prepared to work with us on developing an appropriate ceremony. The discussion was interrupted by a knock on the door. The Prime Minister's private secretary entered with an urgent message. Prime Minister, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation developing. The leader of the opposition is requesting an immediate meeting about the royal situation. Additionally, the Canadian Prime Minister is on the line, asking for clarification about reports she's hearing through diplomatic channels. Prime Minister Richardson felt the weight of the crisis expanding beyond Britain's borders. Ladies and gentlemen, it appears that our window for quiet deliberation is closing rapidly. We need to make some decisions quickly. Foreign Secretary Cross stood up. Prime Minister, I recommend we immediately begin consultations with the Commonwealth realms. We need to understand their positions before we commit to any specific course of action. Agreed. What about the media strategy? Communications Director Lisa Harper, who had been taking notes throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. Prime Minister, the Palace Press Office, and Downing Street need to coordinate a unified message. The speculation is becoming increasingly wild, and we risk losing control of the narrative entirely. Sir Edward looked concerned. There's another complication. Queen Camilla has expressed a desire to make a public statement about her decision. She wants to address the nation directly before the formal announcement. Absolutely not, said the Home Secretary immediately. We can't have competing narratives from different parts of the royal family before we've established the official position. With respect, Sir Edward replied firmly. Queen Camilla is not just any member of the royal family. She's the current queen consort, and she has a right to explain her decision to the people she's served. Prime Minister Richardson realized that they were dealing with competing interests and emotions, not just constitutional law. Sir Edward, what exactly does Queen Camilla want to say? She wants to explain that this transition is her choice, made after careful consideration of what's best for the monarchy and the country. She wants to publicly endorse the Princess of Wales and ask the British people to support this change. The room fell silent again as everyone considered the impact of such a statement. A public endorsement from Camilla could make the difference between public acceptance and constitutional crisis. There's something else we need to consider, said Professor Thornfield. This transition would make the Princess of Wales the most powerful queen in British history. As Queen Regent, she would have authorities that even Queen Victoria never possessed. We need to ensure that these powers are clearly defined and appropriately limited. Attorney General Davies nodded in agreement. We're essentially creating a new form of monarchy. The legal framework needs to be absolutely clear about the relationship between the king and Queen Regent, the scope of their respective authorities, and the succession implications. What do you mean by succession implications? Asked the Deputy Prime Minister. If something happened to King Charles while Queen Regent Catherine held her position, what would be her status when Prince William became king? Would she remain Queen Regent? Would she become Queen Mother? The legal precedent we set now will determine royal succession for generations. Chief Whip Clark raised another practical concern. Prime Minister, we also need to consider the parliamentary timetable. If we're going to pass this legislation quickly, we'll need to suspend other business. The opposition will want something in return for their cooperation. What might they want? Probably guarantees about constitutional review, maybe promises about future democratic reforms to the House of Lords. They'll see this as an opportunity to push for broader changes to the system. Prime Minister Richardson stood up, signaling that the formal portion of the meeting was coming to an end. Ladies and gentlemen, here's what we're going to do. Foreign Secretary Cross will immediately begin consultations with the Commonwealth realms. Lord Chancellor Hartwell will start drafting the necessary legislation. Attorney General Davies will work with the palace on defining the specific powers and limitations of the Queen Regent position. She paused, looking around the table at faces that would be remembered in history books as participants in one of the most significant constitutional changes in British history. Sir Edward, please inform His Majesty that we will support this transition, subject to parliamentary approval and Commonwealth agreement. However, we need complete cooperation from the palace on timing and messaging. This cannot become a constitutional crisis that undermines confidence in our entire system of government. Understood, Prime Minister. And, Sir Edward, one more thing. Please tell Queen Camilla that her desire to address the nation is appreciated, but it must be coordinated with our overall communication strategy. The British people need to hear a unified message about why this change is necessary and beneficial. As the meeting broke up, ministers and advisors clustered in small groups, discussing the implications of what they had just agreed to support. Prime Minister Richardson remained seated, staring at the papers scattered across the table. Deputy Prime Minister Morrison approached her. "Sarah, are you having second thoughts?" "I'm thinking about what we've just put in motion, James. We're not just changing who wears the crown. We're fundamentally altering what the crown means. Future historians will mark this as the moment when the British monarchy either successfully modernized itself or began its final decline toward irrelevance. And which do you think it will be?" Prime Minister Richardson gathered her papers and stood up. "That depends entirely on whether the Princess of Wales is as remarkable as everyone believes she is. In 6 weeks, she'll either become the most successful queen in British history, or the woman who accidentally destroyed the institution she was trying to save." The constitutional crisis was no longer a possibility. It was unfolding in real time, and the decisions made in the coming days would determine whether the British crown would emerge stronger or find itself forever changed by the weight of unprecedented transformation. The morning of November 15th dawned crisp and clear over London, but inside the BBC television studios, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Tonight would mark one of the most unprecedented moments in British broadcasting history. A joint interview with Queen Camilla and Catherine, Princess of Wales, to be followed by a rare televised address by King Charles himself. The decision to break the news through a coordinated media appearance had been debated for weeks in the highest levels of government and the palace. Traditional royal protocol suggested a simple written statement, but the magnitude of the constitutional change demanded something more personal, more direct. The British people needed to see and hear from the women at the center of this historic transition. Dame Rebecca Thornfield, the BBC's most senior royal correspondent, sat in the makeup chair reviewing her notes one final time. After 30 years of covering the royal family, she had thought she had seen everything. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for this moment. 5 minutes, Dame Rebecca, called the floor manager. In the green room, Catherine checked her appearance one final time. She had chosen a navy blue dress from a British designer, elegant but not ostentatious, projecting both authority and accessibility. Her stylist had suggested subtle jewelry, the diamond earrings that had belonged to Princess Diana, and her wedding rings. Every detail had been carefully considered to send the right message to a watching nation. Queen Camilla entered the room, looking remarkably composed for someone about to make one of the most significant announcements in modern royal history. She wore a soft gray suit with a pearl brooch that had been a wedding gift from Charles. The two women embraced briefly, a gesture of genuine affection that cameras were not present to capture. "Are you ready for this, Catherine?" Camilla asked quietly. "I don't think anyone could be ready for this," Catherine replied honestly. "But I'm prepared. That's all any of us can be. Prepared and willing to serve." Meanwhile, in living rooms, pubs, and public spaces across Britain and the Commonwealth, millions of people were gathering around television screens. Social media buzzed with speculation about what would be announced, though most of the public had already guessed the general outline from weeks of media coverage. In Manchester, retired teacher Mary Phillips watched with her daughter and granddaughter, 3 generations of women, all curious about what the future might hold for the monarchy they had grown up respecting. "I still can't believe Camilla would step aside," said Phillips's daughter. "After all she went through to become queen." "Maybe that's exactly why she's doing it," replied the grandmother. "She knows what it costs to fight for that position. Maybe she doesn't want to see the institution damaged by questions about her health." In Edinburgh, university student James MacLeod watched with his flatmates in their cramped student apartment. As a young Scot, he had grown up largely indifferent to the royal family, but recent events had captured his attention. "Do you think this changes anything about Scottish independence?" asked his roommate. "Maybe," James replied. "Catherine's pretty popular here. If she modernizes the monarchy, it might make republicanism less attractive to Scottish voters." The interview began with Dame Rebecca providing context for viewers who might not understand the constitutional complexities involved. "Tonight, we witness something unprecedented in British history. For the first time, a reigning queen consort will voluntarily transfer her duties to another member of the royal family during the monarch's lifetime. This is not abdication, not divorce, not constitutional crisis. It's something entirely new." Queen Camilla spoke first, her voice steady and clear. "Rebecca, I want to make something very clear to the British people. This decision is entirely my own, made after months of careful consideration and extensive consultation with my family, my doctors, and my advisors. Your Majesty, can you help us understand why you've made this choice?" Camilla paused, choosing her words carefully. "When I married Charles, I understood that I was marrying not just a man, but an institution. That institution is bigger than any individual. Over the past several months, it has become clear to me that the monarchy would be better served by someone who can dedicate the next several decades to its service." "Are you referring to your health challenges, which have been reported in the media?" "Partly, yes. I'm 76 years old, Rebecca. Even in the best of circumstances, how many more years could I realistically serve as queen? But this isn't just about my health. It's about recognizing that Catherine represents the future of the monarchy in ways that go far beyond age." The camera turned to Catherine, who sat with perfect posture but managed to appear relaxed and approachable. "Your Royal Highness," Dame Rebecca continued, "this places you in an unprecedented position. You would become queen not through marriage to the king, but through appointment during his reign. How do you feel about accepting such a responsibility?" Catherine took a breath before responding. "Rebecca, I feel honored by the trust that both His Majesty and Queen Camilla have placed in me. But I also feel the enormous weight of responsibility. This isn't about personal ambition or advancement. This is about service to the British people and to the institution of the monarchy. What would change in your role? What would being Queen Regent mean practically? It would mean assuming the full range of constitutional and ceremonial duties traditionally held by the Queen Consort. I would become the primary female representative of the Crown, working alongside His Majesty to carry out the functions of the monarchy. But I would also bring my own perspective and priorities to the role, such as I've spent 15 years learning about the issues that matter most to British families: mental health, early childhood development, the arts, conservation. As Queen Regent, I would have greater scope to champion these causes and to help modernize how the monarchy engages with contemporary challenges. Queen Camilla leaned forward slightly. Rebecca, I want people to understand that I'm not disappearing. I'll continue to support causes close to my heart, particularly literacy and domestic violence prevention. But I'll be doing so as Queen Camilla, not as the primary queen. Think of it as a transition rather than a replacement. Your Majesty, how have you explained this change to your family, particularly to your children and grandchildren from your first marriage? With complete honesty, my children have watched Catherine's development as a royal for 15 years. They understand that she's earned this position through dedication and capability. They support my decision completely. Dame Rebecca turned back to Catherine. Your Royal Highness, critics might say that this undermines the traditional nature of royal marriage and succession. How do you respond to those concerns? I understand those concerns, Rebecca, but I think we have to consider what traditions serve us well and which ones might need evolution. The monarchy has survived for over 1,000 years because it has been able to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining its core values of service, duty, and dedication to the nation. What about your own children? How have Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis reacted to this change? Catherine smiled for the first time during the interview. They're still quite young, of course, but we've explained to them that Mummy will have additional responsibilities helping Grandpapa, and that this is a way of serving the country and the Commonwealth. They understand it as an extension of the work I've already been doing. Queen Camilla, do you have any concerns about how history will remember this decision? Rebecca, I hope history will remember that when faced with a choice between personal preference and institutional good, I chose to put the monarchy first. I hope people will understand that sometimes the greatest act of love, whether for a person or an institution, is knowing when to step aside. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from the constitutional changes required to the upcoming ceremony that would formally invest Catherine as Queen Regent. Both women appeared calm, thoughtful, and united in their commitment to making the transition as smooth as possible. Across Britain, the response was immediate and largely positive. Social media filled with messages of support for both women, praising Camilla's wisdom and Catherine's grace. Opinion polls conducted immediately after the broadcast showed overwhelming approval for the transition, with nearly 75% of respondents supporting change. Following the interview, King Charles delivered his own address to the nation from Windsor Castle. Wearing the uniform of Admiral of the Fleet, he spoke with the authority of his position, but also with evident emotion about the personal cost of the decision. My subjects, he began, using the traditional formal address. Tonight you have heard from two extraordinary women who have shaped my life and my reign in immeasurable ways. Queen Camilla has been my partner, advisor, and closest confidant for over 2 decades. Her decision to transfer her duties to Catherine, Princess of Wales, represents the highest form of selfless service. He paused, his voice carrying subtle emotion. Catherine has proven herself over 15 years to be exactly what our monarchy needs for the challenges ahead. She understands that the crown must evolve while maintaining its essential character. She represents the bridge between our cherished traditions and our necessary future. The king outlined the constitutional changes that would be required, the timeline for Parliament's approval, and the ceremony that would mark Catherine's formal installation as Queen Regent. This transition will make our monarchy stronger, more relevant, and better equipped to serve you in the decades ahead. I ask for your support as we navigate this change together. In the hours following the broadcasts, international media coverage was extensive and largely positive. Commonwealth leaders issued supportive statements, though several noted that their own countries would need to approve the constitutional changes before they could take effect. The Archbishop of Canterbury released a statement calling the transition an act of profound wisdom and Christian service, and confirming that he would officiate at the ceremony investing Catherine as Queen Regent. Opposition political leaders, who had been briefed in advance, expressed general support while noting that Parliament's approval would depend on the specific details of the proposed legislation. But perhaps the most telling response came from ordinary citizens. In pubs and coffee shops, on social media, and radio call-in shows, the British people expressed something that had become rare in recent years when it came to the royal family: genuine enthusiasm and optimism. Margaret Stevens, a teacher from Birmingham, summed up what many felt. Catherine has always seemed like one of us who happened to marry a prince. Now she gets to show that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when given the opportunity. That sentiment would prove crucial in the weeks ahead, as Parliament debated the constitutional changes and the royal family prepared for a ceremony unlike anything in British history. The people had spoken, and their voice was clear. They were ready for Queen Catherine, and they respected Queen Camilla's wisdom in making it possible. The transition was no longer a matter of constitutional theory or royal protocol. It had become a reflection of what the British people wanted their monarchy to be in the 21st century: modern, meritocratic, and deeply committed to service above self.